Sports fam, what's good? Welcome back to the Mike Check Podcast. This is T Word, the People's Champ. Thanks for joining. Today we're going to be talking about the NFL Draft and do a quick grade on the top five and bottom five and some specific teams and players that I found interesting heading into the draft. Obviously, we're going to talk a little bit about the New Orleans Saints draft and what I thought of it, but we're going to look at the entire league for the most part. But before we get into the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We appreciate your feedback. All right, so let's go ahead and get right into it. The 2023 NFL Draft is over. And before we really get deep into the NBA playoffs, I want to give my grades or give a grade on different teams. We're going to do the top five, bottom five, and I'm going to use the Sporting News website as a guide to help provide some context to some of the things that I'm going to say. So the first thing I want to talk about is going to be the bottom five teams that I think had, I guess you could say, the least, I don't want to say lackluster, but I guess I just want to say they didn't have the better drafts, okay? It's kind of hard to really just like fumble the draft completely. So I'm not going to say that's what happened, but I'm definitely going to point out some teams that didn't do as great. So let's start with let's see. All right, fifth worst. We're going to look at the Green Bay Packers. So the team doesn't have Aaron Rodgers, and they got quite a bit of compensation in order to get him off their roster, right? So what I'm looking at with them is when you've got a gang of picks, you've got a lot of different things that you can do. So they picked up a quarterback, Sean Clifford. They got Lucas Van Ness early in the draft. Luke Musgrave as a tight end, Van Ness as an edge rusher, wide receiver Jaden Reed, and then a tight end Tucker Kraft. Now, these are your early four picks, right? So you got positions, you got two tight ends. Obviously, you're kind of pointing to the fact that you may be looking for more ball control, something to bring your next quarterback along. But I don't know that Clifford is that guy. So they're going to be the fifth worst draft. All right, now, Los Angeles Chargers. This is a team that seems to constantly be in flux. And we talked about this in our pre-draft situation. It feels like they're always we're a couple pieces away. We're rebuilding just a little to get where we want to be. And then they go and get like Max Duggan at quarterback. They get a couple of wide receivers, which is good for Justin Herbert. But then you kind of go, why did you get a quarterback? Like, why not just get another receiver and just get another warm body in the room? I think Quinton Johnston as a receiver pick is a good pick, but does he fit their scheme? I guess is the bigger question. So when you start to put these different pieces of the puzzle together, you look at it and go, I don't know that this draft turned out the way they needed it to. Next up, this is bottom three. You're looking at the New England Patriots. So their first pick was good. You got, one of the better cornerbacks in the draft, Christian Gonzalez. And then from there, it's just a bunch of picks that don't really move the needle enough. Now, Isaiah Bolden is a good pick. He's going to be a pretty good player, in my opinion. He's going to need to develop. There's another cornerback, and he's somebody that I think in 2 years you're going to hear his name quite often. He's just got that type of skill. They picked up a defensive tackle, a safety, a center. They drafted a kicker and a couple of guards, and then, a couple wide receivers and a punter. You hear what I'm saying? So they draft 3 cornerbacks, 2 guards, a kicker, and a punter. From the excitement standpoint, this is a terrible draft. I just think that the cornerback group kind of makes it a decent draft. I just don't know that it's going to be a draft that produces great starters for them. Or, Belichick likes a lot of role players. I don't know that you're going to get that from this group necessarily. All right, Washington Commanders. This team is kind of turning things over. And I think that they're just this draft, they were kind of trying to figure stuff out for maybe next year, not necessarily this year. And this draft is one of those setups. they're in a conference, excuse me, in a division that's actually getting better. The Cowboys are getting better. The Giants are getting better. And the Eagles obviously are a really good team. And they just didn't make enough ground via draft in order to close the gap on these teams. Um, they didn't pick up a linebacker, something that they needed. They don't have a quarterback on the roster that they can develop, so they need to get one. They didn't do that. And I believe they need a tight end. So this team just didn't get there. um, Arizona Cardinals. The Sporting News actually gave them a D, um, and they kind of just they traded back in order to get more picks, but then they didn't necessarily pick the right guys. Paris Johnson Jr. was a good pick. Their edge rusher BJ Ojulari, that was a good pick. Rest of the draft is just you've got to just sit back and see what happens. I mean, they got a quarterback Clayton Tune, but you've got Kyler Murray, who you just gave a lot of money. Um, Outside of getting the tackle to protect Kyler, the rest of this draft is just okay. So that's how you get into that bottom group. And then finally, the Jets. They had a really good 2022 draft, and then they kind of fumbled in 2023. And, part of the issue is that they had to give up so much to get Rodgers, and then you're not really in a position to get some of the better players because you're right on the cusp just because of the way their picks fell. It wasn't a good year for them to draft coming off last year. I mean, the previous season, you got Sauce Gardner, you got Garrett Wilson, and you got Breece Hall. And then this year, you got Will McDonald IV and Joe Tillman. So, things could have been better for them, and they just weren't. Now, I want to look at the what I would consider the top 5 teams as far as draft grades go. And we're going to start with number 5. And again, I'm using Sporting News as a guide, so take some of this with a grain of salt that I'm mixing in my personal perspective with something that I think that they were thinking, and we're just going from there. All right, so number 5 is going to be Chicago Bears. They actually grade them as an A. I'm going to go B+. Kind of washes out to the same. They picked up an offensive tackle, which is good to protect your QB. They picked up a couple cornerbacks, Tyreek Stevenson and Terrell Smith. And then they fortified their defensive line with Zach Pickens and Travis Bell. They picked up another wide receiver, a couple wide receivers. So they kind of doubled down on a few positions simply because they're trying to develop depth on the team that sometimes showed that it didn't have it last year. And if one guy gets injured, then the team suffers at that position until that player can return because they really didn't have somebody step up. Now you're providing depth by using draft picks and draft capital to get those guys. Next up, we talked about them a minute ago, the New York Giants. They gave them an A. I'm going to agree with that grade. Picked up cornerback Deontay Banks. They grabbed a running back and then also a couple of safeties. So they kind of flip-flop back and forth, offense and defense. They picked different positions that were positions of actual need, and they didn't just go best player available. They got the guy that they needed. They got that corner immediately that could go outside and play on the edge, and finding a good boundary corner these days is like striking gold. They also got a running back that's going to be a change of pace for Saquon Barkley. And if you could take, he's one of your better players, so you want to get him as many snaps as possible. But if you could take some of the snaps off the table for him and give him a spell, I think you get him to last a full season without getting nicked up like he's shown that can happen to him the last few years. All right. Number 3 team is going to be the Indianapolis Colts. They got quarterback Anthony Richardson. They got a cornerback Julius Brents and wide receiver Josh Downs, as well as an offensive tackle. So they got a defensive guy and then 3 offensive guys that are probably going to see time almost immediately. They doubled down on defense by getting 2 more cornerbacks. And then they also picked up a running back, something that was a position of need. And then they also picked up another tackle later in the draft. So they kind of picked their spots, and they went and got players that are going to fit with what they want. Richardson is going to be a good quarterback. How long his development is going to take is the biggest question. But that's why you get a guy like Downs who's going to give him the opportunity to make big plays early on in his career, which is going to build his confidence and fortify his belief in himself. And I think that's going to go a long way for him. All right, next up, another NFC East team, the Philadelphia Eagles. They gave him an A+. They picked up Jalen Carter. I scratched my head at this pick because they've already got Jordan Davis in the middle, but you put former college teammates side by side on the inside, and maybe there's going to be a little bit of a scheme change, but we'll see. Um, but you also have another Georgia guy, which they've kind of fallen into that New Orleans thing where it's like they pick the college, they like that program, so they keep going back to the well, like the Saints do with Ohio State. It's kind of a similar thing here because they got Nakobe Dean and Jordan Davis, and then they come back this year with Jalen Carter. They got an edge rusher, Nolan Smith. So this is creating a very explosive front seven for them. They also picked up an offensive tackle, a safety, a cornerback, and then they got quarterback Tanner McKee, and then another defensive tackle. So I'm seeing that they're going to make some shifts in their scheme. Maybe they feel comfortable with the players they have executing what they have, and now they're going to get a little fancy. So it looks like they're kind of sort of putting in the ability to do some different packages, which is going to make them even more dangerous. Maybe they could go with like a NASCAR deal where they can get fast, or they can go big heavy where they can put the big beef up front. You know, if they want to come after pass rusher, they have that. They want to stop the run, they can have that, and they don't have to go too far from their base scheme. They could just substitute a couple players and make it work. So Philly is continuing to be on the rise. Obviously, they just went to, big game and all that stuff. So I think they're just trying to find a way to stay where they're at and then get better. Number one team for the draft. They gave me A+. I'm going to agree with this. Sporting News picked the Pittsburgh Steelers, and they picked up an offensive tackle, a cornerback, a defensive tackle, tight end, linebacker, another cornerback, and then an offensive lineman, an edge lineman. He's a guard/tackle. So this was the first draft for their general manager, and he did what he had to do. Big needs were offensive tackle to protect Kenny Pickett, and then a big cornerback to help Patrick Peterson, and they did both. Joey Porter Jr. obviously also a legacy pick, so that's pretty cool. Jones can come in and start right away, so this is going to be good for them. And then you've got some defensive people like Benson and the linebacker they picked up, Herbig, who are going to come in and contribute right away. Even if they're not starters, they're going to allow the current starters to get a little bit of a blow, and you can get a rotation on that defense. So this is a draft. It fit everything that they needed, and it's guys that are going to be able to contribute immediately. So if we're going to talk about some other things, I want to talk about CJ Stroud. He was picked really early, went to the Texans, got them to bring in a target for him, which is good news. I believe the Detroit Lions had a pretty good draft as well. Sporting News actually gave them an A. They ranked them number 6. The Kansas City Chiefs, your Super Bowl champs, also received an A grade. I tend to agree with that. They gave the Ravens an A. I don't agree with this, and most people are saying they got an A because they got a target for Lamar Jackson and Zay Flowers. I don't think that that's enough to say whatever. They gave the Tennessee Titans an A-, and a big part of it is they got a quarterback and a lineman, and they kind of feel like it was like really truly need-based, I guess you could say. But I don't grade on the lean just because you hit a couple of needs. I need to see you hit several needs, so I can't agree with that. I did mention that I was going to talk about the Saints, but I'm going to mention the Panthers here because they're a division foe. They picked up Bryce Young, they picked up wide receiver and John Domingo, and then the edge rusher DJ Johnson, a guard, and a safety. So with limited picks, they gave him an A-. I give it like a B-, and I'm not hating. That's just what I think. All right, so the Saints ended up way down at number 17 because they feel like most of the picks were a head scratcher. The Saints needed a defensive tackle. The Saints needed an edge rusher, and they got that. The Saints are going to be in need of a running back because we don't know what's going to happen with Alvin Kamara. Now, I do agree that the pick of Jake Haener at quarterback just doesn't make sense, and then they also picked up a safety and wide receiver. Couple of positions that you can always use depth. The Saints haven't been drafting wide receivers in a while, just expecting guys to just come in and perform and try to find guys off the street. They got Chris Olave last year, but we need to get stud wide receivers, and that's just not something the Saints seem to be really wanting to do. But the Saints focus on defense. I think the offense is going to be good because we got Derek Carr. We got some good wide receivers in the building. Michael Thomas will be back. So I feel good about where their team is at. But again, we'd love to get your thoughts. I'm going to wrap it right there. This has been T for the Mike Check Podcast. Until the next time, I'm out.